Hello, parents. Welcome. Hello, heroes. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Today we going to have a very interesting conversation about parental alienation, but this is the thing that we talk about quite a bit, is that sometimes parental alienation actually happen to other part of the family, like grandparents and relatives, that we don't usually talk about. And then I think recently we have a conversation where I reviewed some peer review study about the impact of parental alienation on grandparents and how they actually feel that they are a forgotten part of the equation. They are a part of the victim and a part of the equation that people sometimes forget. So today we're actually going to have a very interesting conversation about that. And with us, I have a very special guest. She is a state representative of Pennsylvania State Representative Rep Emily Kinkead. Thank you so much for being here, Rep Kinkead.
Thank you.
So today, I hope to talk about if you could share with us your personal experience, especially, as a child growing up in that environment and, hearing these stories and actually kind of like brainwashed because you actually believed in that, right? And it impacted you. I wanted to see how it impacted you and also with your work today, if it has any influence in your policy making work today. And then parents, like I said, please do let me know. I want to like kind of double check before I go on. So please give me a second because sometime I might have technical problem and parents cannot hear it. And I want to make sure that our audio and things are working, so please give me a second because sometimes like my system it kind of lag and it doesn't tell me until a little bit later. So I think I see Rebecca. So Rebecca, can you hear me? Rebecca says there are two dynamics: victims and cross-generation coalition who triangulate with abuser. I assume Rebecca, and I assume everyone, you guys can hear me. I know there's people are watching. Could someone let me know? I know my system is like, I'm sorry. So let me reload, hopefully. I see comment, but I don't know if that's before the audio is kicking in. I'm sorry, I ran like, I think this is like nearly, I know it's over 100 events, and I don't know why every time it does this. So can you guys hear us okay? Oh wait, great. Thank you so much, Claudia. Okay, yes, the audio is fine. Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm so grateful. And by the way, you guys, this is so important. And yeah, we have somebody in the house from Pennsylvania. Rael's in from Pennsylvania, actually. This is so important is that a lot of people don't realize, though, before we talk about the topic of today, is that a lot of people don't realize that they should be talking to their state representative. We have Lars actually calling from Europe. Yeah, because and I'm so grateful for you to because you really show that's the point. That's truly you are open to listen to the public, to listen to your constituents. So really, for anybody out there, if you are you have things that you're passionate about, that you think that things that matter that impacted you, you should be calling your state representatives, and you can look up and find out who that person is and really contact their office, which is exactly how we reach out to Rep Kinkead. Is we reach out to your office. So yeah, could you share with us like when did let's talk about like who is the perpetrator in this side of the story, like which parent?
It was my mom. And my mom really from the first moment was very clear to my sister and I that she was the least favorite daughter. That was her language, that her parents didn't love her as much as they loved her sisters. She had two sisters, and in particular, so my mom was the oldest, and her youngest sister was in my mom's head like the favorite child. And so because my grandparents didn't love her, then that meant that they didn't love us. And that was what we were told from like moment one. So we really never had a relationship with my grandparents, or with my aunt, my mom's youngest sister, my mom's middle sister. We had a relationship with her and her kids. But anytime that my Aunt Nancy was around, they lived in New Hampshire, so we didn't see them all that much. Anyway, but anytime my Aunt Nancy was around, my mom was making comments about her to us, and just basically really planting a lot of these seeds that, like, we didn't have a relationship with her. She didn't want to have a relationship with us. My grandparents didn't want to have a relationship with us. And it wasn't until my grandfather's funeral in 2010 that, that narrative really started to break down. Because I'm sitting in, at the memorial service and listening to my cousins talk about this person that was never, like, we were never allowed to get to know, and how they had had so much fun with him. They used to go camping with him. He was silly. He used to joke around with them. They would do all this fun stuff together. And, that was never the person that was ever presented to us, my sister and I, when we were growing up. And, so I was in my mid-20s at that point. And it was then that I started to kind of realize that, like, the narrative around my Aunt Nancy, the narrative around my grandparents just wasn't true. And that my mom had denied us a relationship with this person for my whole life. And I was never, ever, ever going to have that relationship because he was gone, and I didn't know anything about it until he was gone. And now my grandmother is still alive, but she has dementia, and so there's no really having a relationship with her in any capacity. So it's like I have been denied. I was denied because my mom had created this narrative, a relationship with either of my grandparents at a point where we could actually have had a relationship. And my Aunt Nancy now lives in Oklahoma, and so I also don't really interact with her whole lot, but we do, when she comes to Pittsburgh, which is where I live, and to visit my middle aunt, then I see her and we talk, and so, like, I'm not sure that we'll ever really have a robust relationship like I do with my Aunt Sue, who I was allowed to have a relationship with, but we're certainly working on actually trying to talk a little bit more and know more about each other, at least when she's in town in Pittsburgh. So I mean, it can be absolutely devastating. And I think as a legislator, it is useful to have that kind of an experience, though I wouldn't wish it on anyone else, to be able to make decisions when it comes to particularly the family issues, that if we are going to make decisions, we have to understand the nuances and the complexities of family dynamics. And we cannot, be legislating as if every family is sort of the perfect, 4-person, white picket fence and a dog kind of family. And because that's just not the case. And families are complex. There's a lot of dynamics. And one of the things that I think we don't think about as much, and we're starting to recognize, is that abuse doesn't just happen physically. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's financial. There's all kinds of different methods of abuse, and we have to be cognizant of that when we're making legislation that's going to impact families, because there are people like my mom who, my mom was physically abusive at times, but far more emotionally abusive and psychologically abusive to my sister and I. She denied our relationship with, members of our family. And, that is something that we need to be able to figure out how to kind of protect families in that capacity.
Thank you so much. If it's possible, if I could like unpack it a bit more, especially in the framework of, the forensic model for for breaking down this problem. So, in your story, in your situation, your mother alienated you from part of her family, which is your grandparents and some of your, like actually one of your her sister, which is your aunt. So you were growing up really from right from the beginning. You hear this story. So what kind of things did she say about your grandparents or your aunt? Like, they abandoned you. It was like, what does it mean? Like, what kind of things that was said?
I mean, she outright said, that because they didn't love her, they didn't love us. Like that was, it was very, it was very apparent, that, or not very apparent, but it was that direct. And so, my grandparents used to have an RV, and when we moved out of Pittsburgh, because we're originally from Pittsburgh, we moved out of Pittsburgh for a time. We were living in northeastern Pennsylvania, and my grandparents would come with their RV, and they would come and visit us, and then they would go up to New Hampshire and visit my Aunt Nancy. And the narrative was not that they were there to see us, not that they were trying to spend time with, my mom and her kids and her husband. It was that, oh, well, they're just stopping over on the way to go see Aunt Nancy. So they're just using us for a place to stay. So they don't have to, they can break up the trip, but they don't have to pay for a hotel, or they don't have to pay to rent like campgrounds for the RV. And that was the narrative. The narrative was they weren't actually there to see us or spend time with us. And so at a certain point in time, I remember my sister and I, like, they would come, and we basically just didn't spend time with them at all. We would just go and do our own things and let, them spend time with my mom, but, and my dad. But, it was like, it was reinforced at every time that we would see them or they would come out, that like, they really weren't trying to spend time with us. They really weren't in any way interested in getting to know us or spending time with us. So it is, if you get told that enough, then as a kid you sort of disengage from it. You're like, well, if they don't want to spend time with me, then I'm going to go hang out in my room and play with my dolls or whatever. And so I think at a certain point in time they also just stopped trying, because we weren't engaging with them. So they're like, well, what are we doing? And then eventually we moved out from northeastern Pennsylvania. We lived for a period of time in West Virginia, and then we moved and lived for 6 years in North Dakota. So it was much harder for them to actually come out and see us. But they came out for my sister's high school graduation. They came out for my high school graduation. They traveled. They went to every single grandkid's high school graduation. But even that, we were told that, they were only coming because they felt obligated and not because they actually cared in any capacity. So it was like every single time that we would have, like, before we would have an interaction with them, we were told that, they didn't care about us. It was reinforced each and every time. This is not because they love you. This is not because they care about you. This is because they feel obligated. This is because they, it's convenient for them to do what they want to do. So, they're just passing through, so it was consistently, time after time, every single time, just reinforced with us.
Yeah, I do see a lot of comment and questions, you guys, in the chat room. Thank you so much. Please continue to keep it coming. We will try to pick it up. I even see question about legislative perspective from Kenneth. I see, Jennifer said this is so close to home. Really happy to have you here. I saw, Rebecca talk about, these parents, some parents are narcissistic and that kind of things. I do see comment and question, even question about your dad. So yeah, please do keep the questions coming. We'll try to pick it up. So yeah, I think what you just described is such a textbook situation, is that it doesn't matter what the targeted victim of alienation does, whatever the action or whatever they say is going to be colored in a way that is negative. So there's nothing that they could do or say that would be right. And as a child, you take that on because, like, there's no way for you to question otherwise, because that's the only thing that was presented to you, right? So unfortunately, that's what you took on. And I could see what you just described, that you it manifested in your and your sister behavior, in that you rejected them
Hmm.
because of your mother's narrative.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's so you never stop and question that. What about your dad? Like, did he say anything? Did he participate in this? Did he ever correct her? I mean, I know this is her part of the family, so it's also hard for him to be playing a role in it.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because even as I'm like thinking about this, I realized that she kind of tried to do it with my dad's mom as well. In particular with me, less so with my sister. Um, but like she told me that my dad's mom was disappointed that I wasn't a boy. And so that, that she was always sort of disappointed in me. So she definitely, and for a while, my grandmother on my dad's side and I really did not have a good relationship because I really didn't think she liked me because that's what my mom told me. And in that capacity, like, but my dad is an only child, and so his mom was very important to him. And so she was at every holiday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving. She, when we were living elsewhere, she was living in Pennsylvania and we were living in other states, she would come and visit every holiday. And so the narrative didn't stick as well. So by the time I was in middle school, I was realizing that, like, no, I think it's really just she doesn't know how to interact with me. And so I decided to put a lot more effort into that, and we had a really good relationship until she passed. But and that was partly my dad of him being like, have you thought about maybe she just doesn't know how to talk to you? And I think it's partly because he actually had a relationship with her and he understood, what was going on in her head. And so could kind of bridge that divide. My dad never really had a relationship with my mom's parents. And I think part of it is that, she gave him the same story that she gave us, which is, well, they never really loved her. They never really cared about her. And they did do some things to kind of reinforce that to my dad. So even when my parents were getting married, my grandparents were responsible for reserving the caterer. And they didn't actually accomplish doing that and didn't tell anybody until like the last possible moment. And so it was like, so that kind of stuff, like my dad saw as reinforcing this, like that this story is true, that what my mom had been saying all along was true, that they didn't actually love her or care about her. And so I think my dad really picked it up as, well, I want to protect my kids and I don't want them to be disappointed. I don't want them to continue to try to seek love from people who don't love them. And so he kind of, let it go. And I think really when my sister and I started to realize that this narrative wasn't true, we kind of ended up having to bring my dad along with it. Like, look, she's been kind of pulling the wool over all of our eyes about this. And, her narrative in this capacity is not correct. And I appreciate my Aunt Sue for also really working to try and be like, look, the stories that your mom tells about her childhood come from a very specific slant. And, I was there too. And, the things that she says are evidence of the fact that that our parents didn't love her are really just, conflicts that any, teenager would have with their parents. Like, you're going to fight with your parents because they want you to clean your room and you don't want to clean the room. And she interpreted like everything like that as, well, you don't make, Sue or Nancy do this stuff and you don't fight with them this way. And it, so this was just, it became a narrative for her that they didn't love her and just continued on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Two things is that one is that your dad, as a third party, and we see this a lot, is that people will fall for the narratives because there's no way for them to verify that. So your dad will have to, and even that story you talk about the caterer, in fact, there's a possibility that that is not entirely true either.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so as a third party, all you have is this conduit that giving you the information, and if that conduit is not truthful, you have no way. And so yeah, so that's why parents will run into, like targeted parents run into this situation where even their family and friends don't understand them and turn against them and participate in the alienation because these people don't know any better. And alienators sometimes are very good at telling these stories. They're very convincing. It's so, yeah. So there's that kind of, and we see that in the situation with your dad. So, and he's thinking that he's doing the right thing. Like you said, he's protecting you. So, for parents, if you're looking at third party that are not being helpful with you, try to think of their perspective. And hopefully if you understand their perspective and the influences that they're being subjected to, perhaps you can find a way to approach them to help clarify this, so that you can get them on your side to be supportive of you, instead of just instantly react to how they act because they have the wrong information. So there's that. And then the other part of it is your mother. And this is a situation I see very common, is that alienator, even though they are the abusive perpetrator, they always see themselves as a victim. It's some kind of childhood, it's unhealed childhood wound, whether it's real or not. They see themselves as a victim, and so they are out there against the world because this is redemption kind of story, and they're doing the right thing really, and unfortunately if they are in that role, it's very hard for them to see the kind of damage that they're doing to you because she's seeing herself as a victim. So she feels very justified in doing whatever that she needs, whether it's wrong or right, even saying the wrong thing, because she's feel like this is justified, to do that. So these are all this part of the equation is so important. And then you mentioned that later on your parents divorced, and how did that play out?
So, so I guess I kind of divorced my mom before anyone else in my family. It was the day after my 24th birthday. My mom, we got into a fight, and through the course of that fight, she ended up looking me dead in the eyes and told me that she didn't need to be sorry for any of the things that she had done because she didn't remember doing them, so it doesn't count. And at that moment I was like, I'm done. I am done trying to make you understand the hurt that you have inflicted on me and my sister. I believed that you loved us enough that if you understood the hurt, that you would be sorry about it, that really where this is coming from is you just don't understand what you did. And if I could get you to understand it, then things would be different. And the fact is that she knew what she did. She just didn't care. And so I was done at that point. And because I was done, it sort of gave my sister permission that she, I think, had been unconsciously seeking to also just be done with my mom, because my sister and my mom had a much more volatile relationship than even my mom and I did. But my sister tried really hard to make that relationship work. This is your mom, like, you're supposed to try and work things out. And so, but between, after I cut her off, my sister also cut her off. And we went through a kind of a little bit of a rough patch with my dad because they were still married. And my sister and I were like, no, she's not welcome to, and we were both living outside the house at that point in time. So it was like, she's not welcome to come visit us. She's not welcome in our houses. And we're just done. And so, my dad would kind of try and force us to have a relationship with her. My sister kind of, again, tried to have a relationship with her, but I was just done. When it was over, I was done. So, it took about a year and a half, to get my dad to realize that, my mom was abusive, and she wasn't sorry about it. And at that point in time, we sort of, it went down at a Christmas, because my sister just had a baby and was willing to give my mom a chance. She's like, look, you're on probation. I have a kid, you know, I want you to have a relationship with the kid, but the first time that you do anything that says that you're not going to be different around my kid than you were around me, we're done. That's it. And so we refer to it as that Christmas, where, you know, it did kind of all fall apart. And that was the moment, I think, that my dad realized everything that we had been telling him was true. And, you know, that she wasn't in fact sorry for any of the things that she had done. And so I think, you know, I kind of pinpoint as like, that's the moment that their relationship really ended. Though they did stay married for another couple of years, that, you know, my dad stopped trying to force us to have a relationship with her. He stopped inviting her to things that we were going to be at. He stopped bringing her. He's like, I'm going to visit my kids and my grandkid because I want to have that relationship. And when my sister got pregnant again, like, he didn't even tell my mom that she was pregnant. So, because, you know, it was just like he basically was just kind of managing her at home and having a relationship with us, and that was it. And so, you know, eventually he, you know, it was like 2015 was when he decided that that he was done and that they were going to get divorced. And so but yeah, it was 2011 when I stopped talking to her, and it was 2015 before my dad actually filed for divorce. So that period of time was really tumultuous, but the actual divorce was, I think, I mean, it was sort of good for everybody, is that, you know, we kind of got to have a relationship with my dad without him having to navigate, you know, like secretly seeing his own children, because my mom would call him incessantly anytime that she knew that we were together or anything like that. So you know, he had the ability to, without shame or anything, spend time with his own family, because my mom was out of the picture then.
So you mentioned that anytime he spent time with you, your mom would call him. What do you think
Mhm.
was she trying to do?
I mean, I think she was trying to get attention. And, you know, I wasn't speaking to her and I wasn't taking her phone calls. And I think it was a way for her to try to sort of force herself to be present in visiting me or visiting my sister. You know, that was the way that she could get attention from us, because we weren't giving her attention in any other way.
And do you think those phone calls make him feel like sort of guilty and uncomfortable about, you know, even spending time with you guys?
Yeah, I think it did. I think especially when he was trying to get us to have a relationship with her and we weren't willing to do that, it was especially hard. But I think at the point where he stopped trying to get us to have a relationship, you know, it was more frustrating to him, where he's like, I'm trying to spend time with my kids and you have made your choice, and you are messing with my ability to spend time with my own children.
Right. And then you mentioned that I think in the court system, um, like how did the court system treat him to the divorce?
So my dad is a doctor, and my mom didn't work. She was on disability, and so when it comes to divorce, they, you know, the courts consider 17 different factors in Pennsylvania, and physical abuse is one of them. The whether or not who is the dependent spouse is another one. Whether or not someone is suffering from mental illness, which my mom is and had a diagnosis of. all of these things were, really in a lot of ways lent themselves in my mom's favor. Because, you certainly could use evidence of physical abuse of children, but there were no minor children in the relationship at the point that they were getting divorced. So like what she did to me and my sister was not relevant or admissible when considering stuff. But so a lot of all of the factors really weighed in favor of my mom in their divorce. And so even though my mom was, psychologically and emotionally abusive to my dad and financially abusive in the sense that she would, I mean, he's making the salary of a doctor, but at the same time, she spent them into bankruptcy at a certain point, and really had no sense of, not sort of spending money without any kind of recognition for bills or anything. And so there were abusive factors in their relationship that couldn't be considered because they're not part of those factors. It's only physical abuse that is considered by the courts. So now they ended up reaching a settlement, so it wasn't a judge that made that decision. But when you're talking even in terms of settlement, you have those factors to weigh where it's like, if we can't reach a settlement, then we're going to go to court and the judge is going to use these factors to decide. So they were, my mom's attorneys and my mom were really able to kind of hammer things over my dad's head about their divorce and how the judge would decide things with really no regard for how my dad was actually treated in the marriage.
Right. So in this situation, we have an abusive party, but yet the factors is not being considered. So there's no implication, there's no consequences for their actions and their behaviors and the impact that they have done to you guys as children and to him as a partner. So the system actually overlooks these things. And like you said, like physical abuse would be considered, but emotional abuse is just not. And that's a problem that we have consistently, right? As a society, throughout the system, and it's sort of like until you see broken ribs and black eyes, you can't see this emotional abuse. But really, at the end of the day, emotional abuse is actually what's the most damaging, because the bruises will heal, but what left behind, even for physical abuse, what left behind is the emotional damage that it has done to the victims. Yeah.
You don't have to hit anybody to really emotionally scar them, and our laws do not reflect that. And that as a legislator is something that I really want to work on, because we are finally recognizing different kinds of abuse that are not physical, and we need our laws to catch up with that.
Right. You touch on this bit a little bit where you mentioned about like what she has done have hurt you a lot. I wonder if you could share more about the impact, how it has really impacted you in your life or your well-being.
I mean, I struggle with depression, and I'm on medication for it, and I also have a lot of trust issues. I'm 35 and single, and it's not because, I haven't been in good relationships. It's been a lot of times because I struggle with trusting people and letting people in. I've been in therapy since 2014, around a lot of these issues, but they're certainly not resolved. So it's definitely difficult to form meaningful relationships with people in a lot of different ways, because you do sort of constantly feel like the other shoe is going to drop, that not being able to trust somebody who is everybody tells you that's the person that you're supposed to be able to trust, it makes trusting other people who tell you, yeah, you can trust me. It makes it very difficult, because then, you know, if those people let you down, then it is almost twice as painful, because you're like, I didn't believe that I could trust you, but I allowed myself to trust you. And then you proved to me that I couldn't trust you. And now I have even less reason to trust somebody else. And so it's, you know, again, you don't have to hit somebody to do the kind of damage that that lasts a lifetime. And it is difficult to you know, get through all of that. And you know, it's also one of those things where I'm like, I feel like I should come with a disclaimer when I am entering into a relationship with somebody, of just like, look, there's a lot of stuff that you're gonna have to get through, and you're gonna have to give me grace and patience. And if you can't do that, then we shouldn't proceed, because this isn't going to be easy. And you're gonna have to work with me on helping me to trust you.
Yeah, I think that's a very common problem with yeah, children that grew up in that environment. Because I mean, it's just the fact that, for example, for her to say that your grandparents didn't love you, it's not just something that's a reflection about your grandparents, because it's actually reflected back to you, right? Because I don't know about you, but for me, when my mother said my father didn't love me, it doesn't, it's not about him. For me to go like, what's wrong with me that even my father didn't love me?
Mm-hmm.
So that it impacted my self-esteem, and then obviously trust issue. And then for you, I don't know, you mentioned that in your 20s is when you recognize that she was lying to you about your grandparents. So I don't know how that point felt for you, but for me, it's that sense of betrayal, because you're like, this is the only person I have left that's supposed to, the you know, the one that's supposed to protect me and love me. It turned out that she didn't. So I don't know, like, what was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I was saying, you know, it was sitting at my grandfather's memorial service, realizing that he wasn't the person that my mom had told me my whole life that he was. And I just couldn't stop sobbing, you know. And I'm I guess the plus side is I was at a memorial service, so it was expected, but I'm like, I'm not upset about, I am upset about the fact that he's gone, but I'm not upset for the reasons that everybody else is upset. I'm upset about the fact that he's gone and I never got to know him. I was never allowed to know him. And all of my cousins have these beautiful memories of him. And I was never given that chance. I was never allowed to have that relationship with him because I was told that he didn't love me. And even my relationship with my grandmother, she lives in the Pittsburgh area, my mom's mom, but I mean, she has dementia. And so we don't have a chance of ever having a relationship. And so, you know, but I see her when I go to family gatherings with my Aunt Sue. She's there, and it's like this, she's a literal living reminder of the fact that I'm never going to have a relationship with her. You know, I don't have any relationship with the person that she is now. And I never had the opportunity to have a relationship with her when she could really genuinely have relationships with people. And so it is, you know, this every holiday kind of reminder of what was denied to me. And yeah, it is being upset about losing the opportunity to have a relationship with somebody, about realizing that the person that I was told he was the whole time was a lie, and realizing all of this at a memorial service for him, you know, with my mom sitting right next to me, and just being like, you lied to me. You lied to me about everything. And for all of the other stuff that you have done to me and to my sister, you know, to then find out that on top of everything else, that, you know, we were denied a relationship with people who actually may have really genuinely loved us, and we will never know.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm so sorry. And I do see a lot of people in the chat room says, like Jen said, I'm so sorry for what you have gone through. Yeah, it sounds just like my experience. And he's struggling also with depression and trust issues. He said, I have difficulty to sleep, so I take most night with sleeping pills. Jennifer said, yeah, trust is really the worst. I'm 60 now and my biggest downfall, and I get it. I'm glad that you're getting help. We see Rebecca also have question. Yeah, that I think there's a lot of comment and question. Thank you so much, you guys, for really sharing your personal experience there as well in the chat room. Okay, someone said, "Oh my God, it's tough to find a guys who want to take the time because I personally feel like I am the burden. So, I almost always kind of over warning them to run away. Uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, and that's the kind of situation I struggle with that a lot. Like you said, the trust issue, and that's very common because, like, how do you learn to trust again after, the injury that was, because anytime you open yourself up, you feel vulnerable,
Mhm.
and then whatever the other person do, you're gonna always look at them with this critical eyes. You're kind of cynical almost because you
Mhm.
constantly, and whatever they do, you're gonna go, oh, is this? And then you lose the ability to be in the moment and appreciate it for what it is and for who they are. And yeah, it's really impact all aspect of your life, because it impacted your self-esteem and relationship. It's so important in our life, right? Because everything we do is in relationship with other people, work or not,
Yeah.
personal,
Yeah.
right? And then, so when you have this trust issue, it's impacted everything that you do, unfortunately. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then, so with, how has this impacted your work, in policy making? You kind of touched on that already quite a bit about how our system is kind of lagging in recognizing these issues. Like, how can we change this? And then how can we help you change this?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is really just educating folks. And it's why I do interviews like this. It's why I have absolutely no qualms about sharing my story with people, because everything from mental illness to uh abuse to alienation from family. um there's a lot of people in the world who don't understand it, but there's a lot of people who do. And there's a lot of people who, like this group of people, we've found a group of people who understand, but there's so many people in the world who are just like, oh my gosh, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just my experience. I didn't realize that anybody else had been through something like what I have been through. And to know that you can go through this and you can get out on the other side, and yes, you're still going to have things that you're going to have to work through, but you can be successful. You can push forward on things. I think that is a really valuable thing that I can provide to a lot of people. Like, look, I'm a state legislator, but I've been through stuff, and I have been through things that you have been through, and I am now sitting in a place where I can advocate for people like us to have a fighting chance. And so I think it's a lot of education, a lot of telling people they're not alone, but also a lot of talking to people who've never experienced the things that I've experienced, that like, hey, there are people in the world that have had this experience. And if we're going to put this legislation through, we need to recognize that it may have this impact, and we need to carefully craft what we're doing to make sure that we're not causing more harm, because we need to be able to talk about that. I mean, we had a hearing on legislation about abuse of children, and denying that parents access to kids if there's abuse allegations. And it sounds good and it's important legislation, but there's also an aspect of being able to weaponize that against parents who are being alienated from their own kids, or family members that are being alienated from their own family, by the perpetrators, by the alienators. And we cannot give those people more tools to cause harm. And we need to be very careful about what it is that we do. So I think that I bring a good and unique perspective to things, that may not occur to people who are trying to do good and trying to address issues, but don't necessarily have a view of the whole picture.
Right, right. Rebecca, I saw the question. Rebecca said, did your mother use alienation tactics to turn the same family against you? I think we already covered this. Her mother really, had this false narrative to brainwash her and her sister, coloring any activities that the grandparents did in attempt to have a relationship with them into a negative light. And she did not put any effort in to encourage them to have a relationship. So obviously she herself did not bring the children to go and see grandparents. We don't even know behind the scene whether there were letters or gifts that had been denied that you don't know about, or visit that were denied. There's no way for her to know, but clearly there's already enough evidence of that. And you mentioned about the legislation. In particular, there's a particular bills that was going through in Pennsylvania, and it actually started in Pennsylvania and then went on and passed at the federal level. It's called the Cadence Law. I think it touched on the aspect that you were talking about. Unfortunately, I think legislator had good intent in protecting families and protecting children, but unfortunately, the exact situation you're talking about is where people overlook the fact that other people will weaponize this legislation against targeted parents, because they overlook the situation where there are parents out there who will alienate children, brainwash children with false narrative, and deprive them of relationship with the other parent. And this law actually empowers them and gives them the weapon to really use it against, and the law, I think, overlook that aspect of emotional abuse like you talk about. And then what happened is actually leave children in the hands of the abuser and empowers them and give targeted parents no remediation to fight for their children. Unfortunately, I know this law has not passed yet in Pennsylvania, but it went through and passed at the federal level without actually any oversight. It did not go through any of the committee. It got slipped into the appropriation bill and it got passed without anybody really reviewing it. That it was never even discussed on the floor. It was really crazy. It passed at the federal level, and now it's heading to every state. Or we actually was finding this in as you know, we talked to you when we were finding it in Pennsylvania. But yeah, we were finding it in several states, including California, where I am, and Illinois and New York and all that. And now it's going to head into other states, and I'm really concerned. And I hope that there are more legislators that will listen to this interview and listen to you to recognize this, because when this law, if it passes, it can really cause a lot of damage. Claudia is asking, how should parents get more involved in legislation? What can they do to help you to, in these situations?
Yeah, I mean, reaching out to your legislators is incredibly important, especially at the state legislative level. So I represent about 64,000 people. And I think it's probably the largest district that you reasonably can represent and still have a personal touch with your district. So state legislators are incredibly accessible. They are, you can send an email, and by and large, you're going to get an actual email, an actual thoughtful response in return. So, if you have an issue, I think it is reasonable to go and take it to your state legislator. You don't necessarily have to track bills. You can just send them a message and say, look, here's an issue. Here's the thing that I am facing. And I'm asking for your help with this. I would love to set up a meeting with you because I want to talk to you about this issue that I'm not sure that a lot of legislators are aware of as you guys are crafting legislation around, protecting kids and families and that kind of stuff. So, if you feel free to educate your legislators about stuff, because we cannot possibly be subject matter experts on everything. And that is where we rely on people who can talk about a subject and help us to speak on it competently as well. So, I talk to people all the time where I'm like, look, Education policy is probably my weakest area. I am not good on education policy in terms of, sort of figuring out what direction we should go. So I rely a lot on stakeholders who can educate me about stuff. And so, I want to hear from people about like, look, we should go in this direction or that direction so that I know where to start looking and doing my research. But, if we don't have a place to start, then nobody's going to really, think about doing it. So that would be my suggestion is like, reach out to your legislator about the things that you care about, even if it's not directly attached to a piece of legislation that's already circulating. But especially if it's around legislation that's circulating, you should reach out to your legislators about that. The other thing that I would say is reach out to the majority leaders, because a lot of times, I know in Pennsylvania, the majority chairs of the committees decide what bills come up for a vote. So if you want to see a bill move, then, even if that legislator is not your legislator, you should reach out to the majority chair, of the committee that it's in, or the majority leader, to bring it up for a vote on the floor if it's stuck there. Because, that they need to hear from people who say, look, you may not be my legislator specifically, but you have a responsibility to everyone in our state because of your leadership position. And so I want you to hear from me as a constituent within our state that we need to move this legislation, and here's why.
Thank you so much. Actually, that's a very important point. A lot of people, we kind of mentioned earlier, is that people don't realize that you legislators are actually, approachable and available. People don't realize that they can actually reach out and contact their state representatives. So it's so important to bring this up, is that, yeah, parents, whatever the issues that you have that you think is important, that they should, the law should change, you really should reach out and tell them. My state legislator in Florida tell us that there's nothing I can do. They pass the buck. We do have situation when, there's certain situation where they either don't understand, or whatever the reason why things don't happen. We don't live in an ideal world, unfortunately. There's a lot of factors and a lot of, it's pretty complicated because we are dealing with human too. And there's two sides of the stories, and, there are people that are more influencing and more convincing in the way they say things and things like that. So we do have to be patient, especially if you have the truth behind you. You do have to be patient. System is a very big, heavy machine, and to move it does take time, unfortunately.
Yeah. A lot of times it is like turning the Titanic. It is slow, it is arduous, it is difficult, and sometimes you will not succeed. But you have to keep trying, because this was always my argument, is that, like, look, I knew when I was running that I was running to get a position in the minority party in the state house. And people were like, aren't you frustrated by this? And I'm like, look, I know that I'm going to be in the minority. I know that I am in the minority. And so, but my goal is to continue to have the conversation so that, I have the bills drafted and ready to go when their time comes, so that people are more and more educated on this. So we can slowly but surely change the incremental, slowly but surely turn things as we're educating more people on this. Now I'm headed into a situation where we're in the majority. The Democrats are in the majority in the House, in the state House. The Republicans still control the state Senate. But we are in a better position to start getting some of those bills that I drafted as a minority member that I knew weren't going to move. Now they're ready. People have looked at them. They've given me feedback on them. I've been able to tweak them to make them better. And so it is a long process. It's a hard process. But if you are really passionate about something, just keep pushing, because oftentimes it is just that the time has not come yet. It's not ripe yet for us to actually work on things. And I know it's hard because you want things done now, and we all do. And there's a lot of urgency behind a lot of these issues. but not everybody feels that urgency. And so you just have to keep pushing to educate people to say, look, there is urgency behind this and we need to do it.
Thank you so much. And the last question before we go, I wanted to ask, sort of, so, with other states, sometimes we would have legislator that would help us with, like we have the law is one part of it, making the law is already difficult. The other part of it is enforcing the law. Is that sometimes we have the failure in enforcing the existing law. So for example, perjury, right, is a crime, but in the custody situation, it's almost never enforced. You will see a situation, especially people that are perpetrator of parental alienation, they will have this crazy allegation of abuse. And then when it's proven to be wrong, they will get away with it. There's no implication. So there's really this incentive for them to lie, because they winning, they gaining, they benefit from their lives, and yet on the other side, the victim, their life is destroyed, because if they were accused of being, a sexual abuser, molester of their own children, even if they were able to prove otherwise, they might have lost their job. The family, there's still people that still don't trust them. They lose their reputation in the community. There's nothing for them to gain back. So even though perjury is a crime, there's a lack of enforcement of that law. Or for example, custody interference is also another crime. When one parent have the court order that say this is the time that they have with their children, and the other parent just outright refuse, it is a crime. But when you call the police, they don't want to do anything, because it's like, well, this is argument between two parents. They don't see it as a federal crime. They don't see it as a felony. And it's actually a state crime, I mean. So, enforcing it, I know enforcing the law is sort of like outside of your responsibility, but I wanted to see if you would consider helping. We do have other state legislators that helping us because you do have better access than parents and advocates in having conversation with, for example, district attorney office, or or the law enforcement about having better enforcement of these laws. I wonder if you would consider helping with that.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely would be happy to help with that, because I have known plenty of people, whether it's because of parental alienation issues or anything else, where sometimes it is literally to punish the other parent, that they're like, oh, I'm not gonna give you the kids, or or they make it unsafe to do a custody exchange, and it hurts the kids, it hurts the parents, it's not good. The frustrating thing is there is actually there's a Supreme Court case, which I think I would love to see overturned. A US Supreme Court case that actually says that even if you had like a PFA or court order or whatever, you are not entitled to the enforcement of that order by the police. So basically what this court order said, or what this ruling says, is that even if you have a court order, it doesn't necessarily have to be enforced. Like there's no obligation of law enforcement to actually enforce it. And I think that lets a lot of our law enforcement off the hook with, actually being able to or actually feeling obligated to get involved in family situations, because I think there's a lot of stuff that they're like, oh, it's a domestic and we don't really want to mess around with that. We don't want to be bothered with that. Like, let's let them sort it out. Meanwhile, like it's custody interference. It's, it's harming these, and it also is, I think the courts should be very offended by this, because those are court orders and they expect them to be followed. And if there's no enforcement mechanism, if there's no consequences for not following it, then it also sort of robs the courts of their authority. So I think that decision was wrongly decided. And I think we often give police officers a pass on not enforcing domestic orders, because, oh, well, it's messy and I don't know. So that, I mean, that's a thing that I think we absolutely should revisit. Now, unfortunately, we would have to wait for the right case, and it would have to make it all the way up through the US court system. So it's not going to be anytime soon that would get overturned. But in the meantime, I think there is a lot that can be done to educate district attorneys and police forces about their responsibility to actually enforce these orders. And that they have a responsibility for, if their jobs are to protect and serve, then they need to make sure that the courts are being listened to by people. And if they are not, then it is their responsibility to enforce the law.
Thank you. You brought up such a great point. Is that police was I have seen cases where parents learn through this and then they had to go to court to have this sentence put into the court order that said the law enforcement will do whatever they need to enforce this. Like they actually literally have to put that in there. It's like a little thing that if your lawyer doesn't know or if you don't know to ask for it, suddenly this piece of paper doesn't mean anything. So parents gone through like sometime a long time and spent so much money to get this piece of paper that is a court order. And then they called the police and said, hey, I need help enforcing this. The police said, oh, you have to go back to court. To do what? To get another piece of paper that doesn't mean anything? It's really crazy. So thank you so much for saying that. So I think we are out of time, but before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to say with parents before we go?
I mean, I just want to tell everybody here that, I know that a lot of what you guys are going through is very, very hard. Whether you've been, the victim of parental alienation or your children are being victimized by it right now. I just really want to encourage you guys to stay strong. And it's a lot easier said than done. And I know that. But this is a community that you have found here, and that matters. And these are people that can help you and support you. And there are more of us out there that are in positions to help. So you should reach out to your state legislators. You should reach out to people that you think need to know about this situation, so that we can all more confidently make good decisions to help people. But none of us are alone in the experiences that we have had. And I think we all need to remember that you may be going through a situation that is unique to you, but you are not alone.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Really, I'm so grateful for and I wanted to say you are so brave. And so, for you to have gone through what you are going through, and you're still struggling with it, but you stand up to fight for other people. So that's really so much courage on your part. And thank you so much for being willing to be transparent and vulnerable to share your story here and in other places. And we are so grateful to have you, somebody like you, who understand and be in the position of changing the system. So thank you so much for being here today and for being you, really. And for parents, thank you so much for being here. I know there's so many more questions that we didn't touch on. I will send Rep Kinkead the link to this video so that she can see if there's any question that she can address. She will maybe send her office to take a look, and if there's something critical. And then, like I said, please do reach out to your state representative. Please help us share this video, like this video, and if you're not already on our mailing list, please join our mailing list on victimtohero.com. And then the other thing too is that we have a retreat coming up in Vietnam in February, sorry. So, today is the last day to sign up for that. So, let us know if you want to join a part of that. We're going to be at an oceanfront boutique resort. So it's going to be an amazing time for you to recoup. So thank you so much and stay wonderful. Thank you so much, you guys.